Steve Harvey had heard thousands of surprising answers during his years on Family Feud. He had watched contestants celebrate, argue, freeze under pressure, and say things that made entire audiences laugh. But on this particular afternoon, one quiet answer changed the mood inside the studio completely. A 68-year-old woman named Martha Bell stood beside Steve, holding the small heart-shaped locket around her neck. Only half of the heart was there. The edge was rough where the second half was supposed to connect. Steve looked at the necklace and asked why she kept touching it. Martha smiled, but her eyes immediately filled with sadness. "My twin sister had the other half," she said. "She died 40 years ago." The audience became silent. Steve studied Martha's face for several seconds. Then he glanced toward the side of the stage where one of the producers was waiting. When Steve looked back at Martha, his usual playful expression was gone. "Miss Martha," he said gently, "I need you to do something for me." Martha looked confused. Steve took her hand. "Look behind you." Before Martha could turn around, the audience began to gasp. But to understand what happened next, you have to understand the promise Martha had carried in her heart for 40 years, the final words she had spoken to her sister, and why she had never forgiven herself for saying them. Martha Bell was born 11 minutes before her twin sister Ruth in a small Ohio hospital during the summer of 1957. Their mother often joked that Martha had spent those 11 minutes preparing to be the boss. From the time they were little girls, Martha and Ruth were almost impossible to separate. They slept in matching beds, wore matching dresses to church, and shared everything from birthday cakes to secret dreams. Martha was the careful one. She folded her clothes, finished her homework early, and worried whenever their father was late coming home from work. Ruth was different. She climbed trees in her Sunday shoes, danced in the kitchen without music, and believed every stranger had an interesting story. Their mother tied a yellow ribbon in Martha's hair and a blue ribbon in Ruth's so their teachers could tell them apart. But the ribbons rarely helped. The girls sometimes switched them just to confuse everyone. They also created a private signal that belonged only to them. Whenever one sister felt afraid, the other squeezed her hand twice. 2 squeezes meant, "I am here." They used the signal during thunderstorms, doctor visits, school performances, and their father's funeral. They used it when Martha married her childhood sweetheart and when Ruth left home to study nursing. No matter how different their lives became, 2 squeezes always brought them back to the same truth. They were never alone. On their 16th birthday, their mother gave them a silver necklace shaped like a heart. The heart separated into 2 pieces. Martha's half carried the word always. Ruth's half carried the word to. Their mother placed the necklaces around their necks and made them promise never to throw them away. "You may grow up," she told them. "You may live in different places. You may disagree. But you will always be 2 parts of the same beginning." For years, the sisters kept that promise. Martha became an elementary school secretary. She married a patient, hard-working man named Daniel and eventually had 2 children. Ruth trained as a nursing assistant. She moved between hospitals, cared for elderly patients, and talked constantly about seeing more of the country. Even after Martha became busy with marriage and children, Ruth called almost every evening. Sometimes they spoke for an hour. Sometimes they said only a few words. Ruth always ended the conversation the same way. "See you soon, older lady." Martha would answer, "11 minutes does not make me old." Then they would laugh. But as the years passed, the sisters began wanting different things. Martha wanted Ruth to move back home. Their mother's health was declining, and Martha felt responsible for keeping the family together. Ruth loved her family, but she wanted a life that belonged to her. She had been offered a position at a rehabilitation hospital several hours away. The job paid more and included training that could help her become a licensed nurse. Martha believed Ruth was running away from her responsibilities. Ruth believed Martha was trying to control her. Their disagreement became worse during the week Ruth was supposed to leave. On the morning of the trip, rain struck the kitchen windows while Ruth packed sandwiches for the bus journey. Martha stood near the sink with her arms crossed. Their mother was asleep upstairs, weak from another difficult night. "You know she needs us," Martha said. "She needs both of us to have lives," Ruth answered. "I'm not disappearing. I'm taking a job. You always make everything sound easy. And you make everything sound like a duty." Martha felt hurt. "At least I stay when people need me." Ruth stopped packing. "You think I don't care about this family? I think you care until caring becomes inconvenient." The words landed harder than Martha intended. Ruth stared at her. Martha saw the pain in her sister's eyes, but pride kept her from apologizing. Ruth closed her bag and walked toward the door. "I will call when I arrive," she said quietly. Martha should have followed her. She should have hugged her. She should have squeezed her hand twice. Instead, she remained beside the sink. "Go then," Martha said. "I don't care." Ruth stood with her hand on the doorknob. For a moment, Martha thought her sister might turn around. She did not. The door closed. Those became the last words Martha believed she would ever say to her twin sister. The bus carrying Ruth left the station shortly before noon. Several hours later, while crossing a bridge during a powerful storm, the driver lost control. The bus struck the barrier, rolled down an embankment, and entered a flooded river. Emergency workers arrived in terrible conditions. Some passengers were rescued near the bus. Others were found farther downstream. Several people were listed as missing. Ruth's handbag was recovered from the damaged bus. Inside were her wallet, travel ticket, and nursing documents. Her coat was found near the riverbank. Officials told the Bell family that Ruth could not have survived. After days of searching, she was declared one of the passengers presumed dead. There was no body for the family to bury. They placed an empty casket in the church and filled it with photographs, letters, Ruth's favorite records, and the blue ribbon their mother had saved from childhood. Martha stood beside the casket, wearing her half of the heart necklace. She kept waiting for someone to tell her there had been a mistake. No one did. During the funeral, Martha's mother reached for her hand and squeezed it twice. Martha broke down. She had lost her twin, but she had also lost the chance to take back the cruel sentence she had spoken in the kitchen. "I don't care." For 40 years, those 3 words followed her everywhere. Martha cared for her mother until she passed away. She raised her children, worked at the same elementary school for 32 years, and became the person everyone depended on. She organized food drives, remembered birthdays, and kept emergency snacks in her desk for children who came to school hungry. People described Martha as warm, dependable, and kind. But there was a locked room inside her heart that she rarely allowed anyone to enter. Every year on the twins' birthday, Martha placed 2 cups of coffee on the kitchen table. 1 cup was for her. The other was for Ruth. Martha would sit in the chair across from the empty place and describe everything that had happened during the year. She told Ruth when her children graduated. She told her when Daniel became ill and when he later passed away. She told her about each grandchild. Then she always ended with the same apology. "I cared, Ruthie. I cared every day." Martha's daughter, Alicia, had witnessed the birthday tradition since childhood. When Alicia was young, she believed her mother was simply remembering someone she loved. As she grew older, she understood that Martha was punishing herself. Alicia often told her that the argument had not caused the accident. Martha knew that logically. But grief is not always logical. Some pain does not disappear. It simply learns how to sit quietly beside you. Years later, Alicia encouraged Martha to search for additional information about the accident. The family requested old reports, contacted local offices, and searched newspaper archives. There was nothing new. The case belonged to a time before records were easily connected by computers. Hospitals, police departments, and local agencies kept information in separate filing systems. Many old documents had been lost, damaged, or never transferred into digital databases. Eventually, Martha stopped searching. She did not stop hoping. Whenever an unknown number appeared on her telephone, a small part of her wondered whether Ruth might somehow be calling. Whenever she saw an older woman with familiar eyes, she looked twice. But after 40 years, hope became something Martha carried privately. She no longer spoke about it because she did not want her children to think she was unable to accept the truth. Then Alicia applied for Family Feud. Martha had watched the show for years. She loved Steve Harvey's reactions, especially when contestants gave answers that made no sense. After Daniel died, Family Feud became part of Martha's evening routine. She would eat dinner, call one of her children, and then watch families laugh together on television. Alicia believed appearing on the show might give her mother a joyful new memory. The Bell family was selected after several interviews. Alicia, her husband Marcus, their son Jordan, Martha's younger son David, and Martha herself were invited to compete. Martha nearly refused. "I am too old to be jumping around on television," she said. Alicia laughed. "Mom, nobody is asking you to jump. We just need you to give good answers. That might be worse." But Martha eventually agreed. What she did not know was that the application had started a chain of events no one could have predicted. During a routine background conversation, a producer named Nina asked Alicia why Martha always wore half of a heart necklace. Alicia explained the story of Ruth and the bus accident. Nina was moved, but she also noticed something unusual. Alicia said Ruth's body had never been recovered. With the family's permission, the production team contacted an organization that helped relatives examine old missing person cases. Alicia also submitted DNA information that her adult son had already placed in a public genealogy database. Several weeks later, an unexpected match appeared. Jordan shared a significant amount of DNA with a woman named Grace Miller from Kentucky. The connection suggested that Grace was probably his mother's first cousin. Alicia did not recognize the name. When she contacted Grace, the conversation quickly became strange. Grace said her mother, a 78-year-old woman named Ruth Miller, had spent most of her adult life with major gaps in her memory. The name Ruth made Alicia's hands shake. Grace explained that her mother had survived a serious accident as a young woman. She had been found unconscious near a river many miles from where a bus had crashed. She had no wallet, no papers, and no clear memory of her last name. The first hospital that treated her identified her only as an unknown woman. Because she repeatedly whispered a sound that resembled Ruth, a nurse began calling her by that name. Ruth had suffered a major head injury. When she woke fully, she remembered fragments instead of a complete life. She remembered a yellow kitchen. She remembered a woman singing while washing dishes. She remembered someone called Marty or Martha. Most clearly, she remembered 2 squeezes of a hand. But she could not remember her hometown, her parents' full names, or enough details to lead investigators to the correct family. The hospital was in a different state from the one investigating the bus accident. By the time photographs of the missing passengers were distributed, Ruth had already been transferred to a long-term rehabilitation center under an incorrect spelling of her name. The systems never connected her to the crash. Meanwhile, because Ruth's handbag and coat had been found with the bus, the search for her as a living missing person slowly ended. After nearly a year of treatment, Ruth regained many basic skills, but large sections of her past remained unreachable. A kind rehabilitation worker named Thomas Miller helped her rebuild her life. He taught her how to complete forms, helped her obtain replacement identity documents through the legal process, and encouraged her to keep writing down every memory that returned. They later married. Ruth and Thomas had one daughter, Grace. Ruth became known for caring for people in the same rehabilitation center where she had once been a patient. Although she never completed her original nursing dream, she spent decades helping people learn to walk, speak, and live independently again. She often told Grace that she believed she had once had a sister. She kept a half-heart necklace in a small wooden box. The word engraved on it had become difficult to read, but it appeared to say "to." When Grace sent Alicia a photograph of the necklace, Alicia began crying. Martha's half said "always." Ruth's half said "to." The women compared birth records, old photographs, medical information, and family details. Ruth had a small crescent-shaped scar behind her left ear. Martha had the same scar behind her right ear from a childhood accident involving a broken garden gate. Then Grace showed Ruth a photograph of Martha. Ruth stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes. Finally, she touched the image and said, "Marty, the DNA test later confirmed what everyone had already begun to understand. Ruth Bell was alive." Alicia wanted to call her mother immediately, but Ruth was terrified. She had now learned that her family had believed she was dead. She also learned that Martha had spent 40 years blaming herself for their final argument. Ruth feared that appearing suddenly might cause Martha too much emotional shock. More than that, Ruth carried guilt of her own. Although she had not chosen to disappear, she wondered whether she should have searched harder when pieces of her memory returned. Grace reminded her that she had spent years working with incomplete information and limited resources. Still, Ruth worried Martha might believe she had abandoned the family. Steve Harvey and the production team were told about the discovery. They spoke with both sides of the family, medical professionals, and reunion specialists. Everyone agreed that Martha should learn the truth in person, surrounded by people who loved her. Because Martha's family was already scheduled to appear on Family Feud, the stage became the chosen place. Ruth traveled to the studio with Grace 2 days before the taping. She remained in a private room backstage. Only a small group of producers, Steve and Martha's family, knew she was there. Martha arrived believing she was simply going to play a game. She wore a royal blue dress, comfortable shoes, and the half-heart locket that had rested against her chest for 4 decades. At first, the taping felt normal. The Bell family faced the Turner family, a lively group from Georgia. Steve joked with both teams, teased Jordan about his haircut, and asked Martha whether she planned to spend the prize money on her grandchildren. "No," Martha said. "They already cost me enough." The audience laughed. Martha surprised everyone with her confidence. She gave 2 top answers and helped her family steal a round. But Steve noticed that she touched her necklace whenever the studio became loud. During a break, he quietly asked a producer whether Ruth was ready. The producer nodded. The game continued until the Bell family earned enough points to reach fast money. They hugged and celebrated while the Turner family applauded. Steve could have moved directly into the final round. Instead, he asked everyone to remain on stage. "Martha," he said, "come over here and talk to me." Martha stepped away from her family. Steve looked at the necklace. "I have been watching you hold that little heart all day," he said. "Tell me about it." Martha glanced at Alicia, who was already fighting tears. "My mother gave it to me when I was 16, Martha explained. "It was a full heart that broke into 2 pieces. My twin sister had the other half." Steve nodded slowly. "And where is your sister now?" Martha took a breath. "She died 40 years ago." The joy left the room. Steve gave Martha time to continue. "She was in a bus accident," Martha said. "They never found her, but they found her things. We had a funeral." "I am sorry," Steve said. "Thank you." "What was her name?" "Ruth." Steve asked Martha what Ruth had been like. For the first time that day, Martha forgot about the cameras. She described Ruth dancing in the kitchen. She told Steve about the blue and yellow ribbons. She explained how Ruth used to bring injured birds home and hide them in the garage. She believed she could save everything, Martha said. "What do you miss most?" Steve asked. Martha looked down. "Having someone who knew me before I became all these other things. Before I became a wife, a mother, a widow, or a grandmother. I was Martha and Ruth's twin. She knew the first version of me." Several people in the audience wiped their eyes. Steve placed his hand over Martha's hand. "Was there something you never got to tell her?" Martha's lips began trembling. Alicia covered her mouth. Martha could have given a simple answer. She could have said she wished she had told Ruth that she loved her. Instead, she decided to tell the truth. "We argued before she left," Martha said. "She was going away for a new job, and I thought she should stay home. I said some terrible things." Steve waited. "The last thing I told my sister was, 'Go then. I don't care.'" Martha's voice broke. "I thought I would apologize when she called that night. But she never called. For 40 years, I have wanted 1 minute back. Just 1 minute." The audience was completely silent. "I wanted to tell her I did care," Martha continued. "I cared so much that I was afraid of losing her. Then my fear helped create the last memory I had of her." Steve's eyes filled with tears. He looked directly at Martha. "Miss Martha, we all have words we wish we could take back. Sometimes pride controls our mouths for 1 minute, and then regret controls our hearts for years." Martha nodded. "But I need you to hear me," Steve continued. "One angry sentence does not erase a lifetime of love." "I know," Martha whispered, "but I wish she knew." Steve glanced toward the stage entrance. Behind Martha, the large doors slowly opened. Ruth stood there with Grace beside her. Her white hair was cut shorter than Martha's, and she used a cane for balance. Time had changed both women, but the resemblance was undeniable. Ruth wore her half of the heart necklace. The audience saw her first. A wave of gasps moved through the studio. Some people rose from their seats. Martha heard the reaction and looked confused. Steve held her hand more firmly. "Miss Martha," he said, "you told me you wanted 1 minute back." Martha stared at him. Steve's voice softened. "Today, you do not have to go back. You can finish what you wanted to say right now." Martha stopped breathing for a moment. Steve turned her gently toward the open doors. "Look behind you." Martha turned. At first, she did not understand what she was seeing. Ruth stood approximately 30 feet away, crying openly. The twins stared at each other. Martha's face lost all color. She placed one hand over her mouth and the other over her necklace. "No," she whispered. Ruth took one small step forward. Marty, the childhood name, crossed the stage. Martha's knees weakened. Steve placed an arm around her to keep her steady. "Ruthie?" Martha said. Ruth nodded. Martha shook her head as if her mind could not accept what her heart had already recognized. "You died." "I know," Ruth answered through her tears. "That is what they told you." Martha looked at Alicia. Her daughter nodded, crying, "It's her, Mom." Martha looked back at Ruth. The distance between the sisters suddenly felt unbearable. Ruth dropped her cane and began walking. Martha moved at the same time. Steve stepped away. When the sisters reached one another, Martha touched Ruth's face with both hands. She studied her eyes, her cheeks, and the line of her jaw. "You look like Mama," Martha whispered. "So do you." Martha pulled Ruth into her arms. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but the sisters did not seem to hear it. They held each other with the desperation of people trying to close a 40-year distance in one embrace. Martha repeatedly said, "I'm sorry." Ruth answered, "No, no, no." Then Ruth took Martha's hand. She squeezed it twice. Martha froze. 2 squeezes. "I am here." Martha released a cry that came from somewhere deeper than words. She leaned against her sister as both women wept. Steve turned away and wiped his eyes. The other contestants were crying. Crew members lowered their equipment for a moment because they could no longer see clearly. After nearly a minute, Ruth whispered something into Martha's ear. Martha looked at her in shock. "What did she say?" Steve asked gently. Martha tried to speak, but no sound came out. Ruth looked toward Steve. "I told her I cared every day." Martha began crying again. Those were the exact words she had spoken to the empty chair on every birthday. Steve brought 2 chairs to the center of the stage so the sisters could sit together. Their hands remained locked. Grace joined them and explained that she was Ruth's daughter. Martha stared at her niece. "You have her smile," Martha said. Grace knelt beside her. "I have wanted to meet you since the day we learned who you were." Martha reached for her and pulled her into the embrace. Steve then invited Alicia and the rest of the Bell family forward. The relatives surrounded Ruth and Grace, introducing themselves through tears. Ruth met the niece and nephew she had never known. She met Martha's grandson. She learned that her mother had lived for 8 years after the accident and had never stopped praying that Ruth might be alive. That truth was painful, but Martha also shared something comforting. "Mama never believed the river took you," she said. "Even when everyone told her to accept it, she kept your room the same." Ruth closed her eyes. "I remembered her singing," she whispered. "I just couldn't remember where the song came from." Steve asked Ruth whether she remembered the morning of the accident. "Only pieces," Ruth answered. "I remember the rain. I remember being angry. I remember wanting to call Martha as soon as I arrived." Martha gripped her hand. "I didn't mean what I said." "I know." "How could you know?" "Because I knew you before that sentence. One moment could never explain my sister to me." Steve nodded and looked toward the audience. "That right there is family," he said. "Family is knowing the whole person, not judging them by the worst sentence they ever said." The audience applauded. Ruth explained what had happened after the crash. She described waking in a hospital without understanding who she was. She spoke about the nightmares, the missing memories, and the kind people who helped her rebuild. She told Martha about Thomas, the husband who had cared for her for more than 30 years before passing away. "He knew I was looking for someone," Ruth said. "Whenever I remembered anything, he wrote it down. He always said that one day the pieces would lead me home." Ruth had brought the old notebook Thomas kept. Inside were decades of scattered memories. Yellow ribbon, blue ribbon, kitchen song, Marty, 2 cups, 2 squeezes. Martha held the notebook against her chest. "I wish I could thank him," she said. Ruth smiled sadly. "He would say bringing me back to you was thanks enough." Steve then asked the sisters to connect their necklaces. Their hands shook as they lifted the silver pieces. Martha's half read always. Ruth's half read too. The pieces fit together perfectly. The full heart had been separated for 40 years, but neither sister had thrown her half away. Steve looked at the necklace and struggled to speak. "In all my years doing this," he finally said, "I have learned that people hold on to things for reasons they cannot always explain. Sometimes your heart knows a story is not over before your mind has any proof." The producers placed an old childhood photograph on the large screen behind them. It showed 2 girls standing together in matching dresses, one wearing a yellow ribbon and the other wearing blue. Martha and Ruth turned toward the picture. "We thought we were so grown," Ruth said. "We looked ridiculous," Martha replied. For the first time since the reunion, the sisters laughed. The sound was almost identical. Steve pointed toward them. "Now that is how I know they are twins." The laughter gave everyone a needed release. The Turner family, who had competed against the Bells, walked across the stage to meet Ruth. Their captain, a retired pastor named Samuel Turner, asked whether he could say something. "We came here hoping to win a game," Samuel said. But today, we witnessed a prayer being answered. There are some moments when competition no longer matters. He took Martha's hand. "My mother waited 27 years to reconnect with her brother. I know what this means. We are happy for your family." The audience applauded again. Steve announced that the show would still give the Bell family their opportunity to play Fast Money. But first, the production team arranged a private room where Martha and Ruth could speak without hundreds of people watching. Martha did not want to let go of Ruth's hand. Before leaving the stage, she turned to Steve. "How did you do this?" Steve shook his head. "I didn't do it. Your children kept searching. Her daughter kept searching. A lot of people followed small clues. I just told you to turn around. You gave me my sister back." "No, ma'am. Love kept both of you available until the truth could find you." Backstage, the twins sat facing one another. At first, neither knew where to begin. 40 years created too many questions. Martha wanted to know everything about Ruth's life. Ruth wanted to hear about their mother, their old neighborhood Daniel, and the children. They finally agreed to start with something simple. Martha asked, "Do you still hate onions?" "Yes." "Do you still sleep with your feet outside the blanket?" "Yes." "Do you still sing the wrong words to every song?" Ruth smiled. "They are not the wrong words if I like them better." Martha laughed and touched her sister's face again. Ruth then asked the question she feared most. "Are you angry with me?" Martha looked surprised. "Angry? For not finding you sooner." Martha moved closer. "You survived something terrible. You woke up without your life. There is nothing to forgive." Ruth's eyes filled again. "Then you have to believe the same thing about yourself. You were angry for one morning. There is nothing to forgive." Martha looked down at their joined hands. "I wasted so many years punishing myself. Then don't waste today." Those words became the beginning of Martha's healing. The sisters could not recover the years they had lost. Ruth had missed weddings, funerals, births, graduations, and ordinary Sunday dinners. Martha had missed Ruth's marriage, Grace's childhood, and the difficult years of rehabilitation. Their reunion did not erase that sadness, but it gave the sadness somewhere to go. Instead of carrying separate grief, they could finally carry the truth together. Later that evening, the Bell family played Fast Money. Ruth watched from beside the stage. Martha and Alicia scored enough points to win the prize. When the final answer appeared, confetti fell and the family celebrated. But Martha barely looked at the scoreboard. She walked straight to Ruth. "You were supposed to see me win," she said. Ruth smiled. "I did." After the taping, the production team arranged a quiet dinner for both sides of the family. Martha and Ruth sat next to each other. They compared photographs, repeated names, and built a timeline of the years they had spent apart. At one point, a server brought coffee. Martha looked at the 2 cups on the table and began crying. Ruth understood without asking. "For 40 birthdays," Martha said, "I put a cup across from me." Ruth lifted her coffee. "Next birthday, I'll drink it before it gets cold." They spent the following week together. Martha showed Ruth their childhood home, although another family now lived there. They visited their parents' graves. Ruth placed flowers beside the stone and apologized for taking so long to return. Martha stood beside her. "Mama knew," she said. Some part of her always knew. They also visited the old bridge where the accident had occurred. For years, Martha had imagined the river as the place that took her sister. Now she looked at it differently. The river had not ended Ruth's story. It had carried her toward someone who found her alive. Several months later, the Family Feud episode aired. Viewers responded not only to the surprise but also to the message behind it. Thousands of people shared stories about relatives they had lost contact with after accidents, adoptions, wars, family disagreements, and moves across the country. Martha and Ruth received letters from people who had been inspired to make a telephone call before more time passed. One man wrote that he had not spoken to his brother in 14 years because of an argument over their father's property. After watching the sisters, he called him. A woman wrote that she had finally searched for the daughter she had placed for adoption decades earlier. Another viewer contacted an aunt she had not seen since childhood. Not every story ended with a reunion, but many people realized that waiting could become its own decision. Steve later spoke about Martha and Ruth during another episode. "Pride will tell you that you have plenty of time," he said. "Life does not always agree. Tell people what they mean to you while they can still hear it." Martha and Ruth decided to use the attention carefully. They did not want to become celebrities. They wanted to help families understand how old records, DNA databases, and missing person organizations could sometimes connect information that had remained separated for decades. With help from Alicia and Grace, they created a small community project called Always 2. The project held monthly meetings at libraries and churches. Volunteers helped older adults scan photographs, preserve letters, record family names, and organize important documents. They also connected families with professional organizations when a genuine missing person case required trained assistance. Martha often spoke at the meetings. She never promised miracles. "Our story had an extraordinary ending," she told people. "Not every search will end the same way. But every family deserves to have its memories protected. Write names on the backs of photographs. Tell your children the stories. Do not assume someone else will remember." Ruth usually added her own advice. "And when your memory gives you even a small piece, write it down. A small piece may not look important until it connects with another one." 1 year after the reunion, Martha and Ruth returned to Family Feud. This time, they walked onto the stage together. They wore matching dresses, although Martha insisted the idea had been Ruth's. "You are older," Ruth replied. "You should have stopped me." 11 minutes older, still older. Steve laughed and hugged them both. The show displayed photographs from the sisters' first year together. They had celebrated a shared birthday, visited relatives, and taken a road trip to places Ruth had once hoped to see. One picture showed them sitting at Martha's kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. This time, both chairs were occupied. Steve asked Martha what had changed most since the reunion. "I stopped living inside one terrible morning," she said. "For 40 years I judged my whole relationship with Ruth by the last words I spoke before the accident. Now I remember the thousands of loving words that came before them and all the words we have spoken since." Steve turned to Ruth. "What did you learn?" Ruth looked at Martha. "I learned that home is not always a place you remember. Sometimes home is a person who remembers you." The audience stood for them again. As the years continued, the sisters built a new life from the time they still had. They spoke on the telephone almost every day, although Martha complained that Ruth called too early. They spent holidays together. Grace became close to Alicia and David. The cousins who had grown up as strangers began creating their own family traditions. Martha kept both coffee cups on the table. Ruth sometimes visited for weeks at a time. During thunderstorms, the sisters sat near the window and watched the rain. Even in their 70s, one would occasionally reach for the other's hand and squeeze twice. "I am here." Some wounds never disappear completely. Martha still felt sadness when she thought about their mother dying without knowing for certain that Ruth had survived. Ruth still mourned the memories her injury had taken from her, but they no longer allowed grief to speak louder than gratitude. On the 2nd anniversary of their reunion, they visited Steve backstage. Martha brought him a framed copy of the childhood photograph with the yellow and blue ribbons. At the bottom, she had written a message. "Thank you for giving me the courage to turn around." Steve read it and shook his head. Miss Martha, you had already been waiting 40 years. All I did was point you in the right direction. Martha smiled. Sometimes that is exactly what a person needs. Before leaving, Ruth handed Steve a small box. Inside was a newly made heart necklace divided into 2 pieces. One half said faith, the other said family. We want you to keep the whole thing, Ruth said. Steve looked at the necklace. Why not divide it? Because you reminded us that those 2 things work best when they stay together. Steve hugged them. Their story was never truly about a television surprise. It was about a mother who refused to stop believing. It was about daughters and grandchildren who treated an old mystery as something worth solving. It was about strangers who preserved records, compared evidence, and followed small clues. It was about a woman who kept half of a necklace for 40 years, even when everyone told her the other half was gone. Most of all, it was about 2 sisters who discovered that love had survived everything memory, distance, guilt, and time had placed between them. Martha never again described Ruth by saying, "My sister died 40 years ago." Instead, she said, "My sister was lost for 40 years, and then she came home." Whenever someone asked what she had thought during the moment Steve told her to look behind her, Martha gave the same answer. For 1 second, I was afraid to turn around. I had wanted Ruth back for so long that seeing her felt impossible. Then I heard her say my childhood name. That was when I understood something. She would touch the completed heart necklace the sisters now wore only when they were together. Time can take away opportunities. It can change faces, houses, and families. But real love leaves a place open. Even after 40 years, Ruth still had a place in my heart, and somehow I still had one in hers. Ruth would then reach for Martha's hand. 2 squeezes. I am here, and this time Martha could squeeze back.